Hi everyone, my name is Rachel Manning. I'm the Film Programs Manager here at the Bullock Museum, and I hope you're all staying healthy and sane in these trying times. Um, I want to start by thanking our incredible web and digital team and marketing team for getting these virtual programs off the ground. Without them, we wouldn't have these programs so quickly and efficiently out there for all of you, so let's give them a virtual round of applause. I'd like to start by saying that Real Women in Film is a series that focuses on the cinematic works of women in front of and behind the camera. And tonight we're going to be focusing on Rachel Lierz' documentary, Knock Down the House, as it connects to our theme this season of empowerment, seen through the lens of activism. I hope you'll join us with the conversation at Bullock Museum, and you can join us now for a live YouTube chat, so please log in with that. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce our special guest moderator, Nancy Bocskor, who's the former director of the Center for Women in Politics and Public Policy at Texas Women's University in Denton. She's also the author of Go Fish, How to Catch and Keep Contributors, a Practical Guide to Fundraising. Thanks, Nancy. Take it away.
Thanks, Rachel, for that introduction. I'm Nancy Bocskor, and it's a real pleasure to introduce our two guests today who were the co-stars of Knock Down the House. The first one is Amy Vilela. Amy is a businesswoman, military spouse, politician, healthcare justice activist. And it is a pleasure to have her on our presentation today. Amy and her 2018 campaign are featured in the documentary that we're watching tonight, Knock Down the House, along with our other guest, Cori Bush. Cori Bush is a single parent, a registered nurse, a pastor, a civil and human rights activist, a community organizer, and candidate for U.S. Congress, who was also featured in this Sundance Festival Award-winning Netflix film. Through the adversity, inequity, and corruption, Cori plans to continue in the bold fight for justice, equality, and equity for all. So it's a real pleasure. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So I have some questions I'd like to talk to you about after I've watched the documentary and, of course, read campaigns. If I could ask, and let's start with Amy and kick off here. What was the biggest surprise you had during the 2018 campaign? What was the most unexpected thing that happened to you on the campaign trail that no one prepared you for?
I think all of us were surprised by many elements during our first run for office. This was the first time we'd seen something on this scale in this country where this many people were actually running on people-powered campaigns that were everyday citizens. I think for me, the number one thing that surprised me was the orchestrated efforts to ensure that we did not win. That was very surprising to me. And the lack of involvement of most people in the community or not understanding the issues, you know, it wasn't surprising that that existed because before I ran, I myself was probably considered one of those people as well. But it was surprising how many people actually aren't involved in our primaries or involved in the issues that affect each and every one of us. So, you know, I'd say the number one thing definitely was the orchestrated effort to make sure that that progressives across the nation did not win.
And we'll expand on that in a few moments. Cori, what would you like to add as what surprised you, most unexpected thing you experienced?
Just how much emphasis would be put on appearance and appearance, not just looking like a woman, you know, what people consider, you know, looking like a woman or femininity, but even just how a Black woman is supposed to look. So just that whole thing, what's professional, what's unprofessional, that was really surprising. It happened, you know, I figured that there may be some of that, you know, but it's because it happened a little bit in my very first race that I ever ran. But this race, it was unbelievable. You know, it was about my hair. It was about the way that I would dress, even if I had on a nurse's, you know, my nursing uniform from work. It was, you know, if you have on a dress, if you have on a skirt, you know, if I have braids, if my hair is straight, like it was just, you know, articles. Like, why do we have news articles about this? It was unbelievable.
But as women, we are so much more harshly judged.
Yes.
When we walk into a room, and I certainly know for women of color, it's even a bigger issue, especially with all this debate about what's acceptable with your hairstyle, which is just shocking to me. Again, we're in 2020.
Right. And it was, you know, I was always unprofessional with my braids because, you know, people talked about my hips and, you know, and I was like sexualized, you know, and like that's the place where people put, you know, Black women, you know, and oftentimes, you know, Asian women too, you know, they can be like, you know, sexualized. So like hypersexualized, I guess. And so people didn't really care about what I was saying or what my policies were. They cared about how my hips looked in those pants or that skirt.
Yes, you know, even though it's been disproved, but it's still, we always say that people are judged like 80% on the appearance, a very much smaller percent on how we sound vocally. But what we're saying is under 5%, right? It's really very frustrating. So I can understand that. So moving on is, and we've talked a little bit when Amy and I were discussing this, on what was your biggest disappointment. Tell us a little bit more, Amy, about the opposition you had from the Democratic Party, the standard Democratic Party. And I'm sure both of you, but Cori, I have some very specific questions to ask you about that.
What you don't see in the movie is that I actually started out primarying a sitting Democrat. He was later decided not to run again because there were accusations of sexual harassment. So I had been in the race for quite some time. And I remember when I announced I was running, and I'd walk into Democratic meetings, it's almost as if I could feel the arrows coming and piercing my soul when I'd walk into a room. And it was that whole thing, well, how dare you? You know, we're not allowed to question our leaders, which I think is a disservice to not only our party, but to also the whole democratic process. Mm-hmm. How do we let our leaders know that we want them to move unless we're willing to stand up to them? They're not public celebrities, they're public servants. Mm-hmm. And somewhere along the line, we've lost that idea and they've become these celebrities and untouchables because they're in office and because they're blue. Well, when we're talking about issues that are affecting lives, I don't care what's behind your name, a D, an R, an I, we need to be pushing on the issues regardless of whether they're Democrat, Republican, or independent. And so, you know, when I was running, it was immense pushback. And then I was the only one in the race. And then all of a sudden we see that all of a sudden they're circling, they're like, oh no, this can't happen. So then we see Horsford, you know, who I eventually won. He was actually living in Washington, D.C., wasn't even in town, came back, you know, registered to vote in Nevada the day before he registered to actually run for that seat. And he was working as a lobbyist in Washington, D.C. So he was brought in from D.C., ensured, you know, made sure that he was sat into that position. And then it was just like the onslaught came in. It was like, whew. And then it was like, there was, I think, I don't know, seven people in that race, just on the Democratic side. But yeah, it was a very odd thing going from I'm primarying someone to now the entire field has changed. So it was a very wild ride. And, you know, there was threats, there was harassment. I was put down. I was told that, you know, I wasn't qualified to run, of course, you know. And so it was, all I can say is that it was very difficult. And I'm sure that all the other candidates went through that as well. It's not easy to walk into a room knowing that you're hated and everything about you questioned, There was times I know that I would say, why am I even doing this? I mean, before I ran, I was a CFO, and I never felt this kind of pushback.
Mm-hmm.
Never. And I remember saying to them, especially when they'd come after me, with the qualifications, what makes you qualified? Because I wasn't from that inner circle of politics, right? I'd say being a single mom and being on welfare, Medicaid, WIC, food stamps, having to put myself through college and then being a CFO, I understand the full gamut of this.
Right.
I understand what it's like to be in the situation that our policies are not adequate enough to address the needs of the working class. I also understand as a CFO what happens on a grander scale to our economy and how we help small businesses. So, with that constant fight, that constant pushback, that constant putting you down, it was exhausting. It was exhausting, but at the same time, I was going to be damned if I was going to let them, deter me from what I knew was a righteous fight.
And we're going to talk a little bit more about this in a few minutes. Cori, do you want to add something there on what was the biggest disappointment that you found as a candidate?
Related to the party or just period?
Just the period. What's, I talked about what surprised you and was unexpected. What was something that disappointed you that you didn't expect, that you did not expect?
My loss. That was actually the thing, because I thought I had pretty much everything in motion, because this was my second race. I knew, so I had already gone through a lot of the disappointments of, expecting certain things or being the outcast, you're the progressive, you're the this, you're the that, you're the woman, you're the that. I went through all of that the first time. So the second time, I was like, we have, this is better, and, having brand new Congress and Justice Democrats, with us, running on the slate with Amy and AOC and, Paula and so many great candidates. I was just like, this is it. And so that loss was just absolutely devastating. It took me by surprise. And it was really devastating because of all the work that we had done organizing, all the hope that so many people had laid on us. It was like carrying all of these people's hopes, and dreams and, ambitions of, this greater tomorrow, and just having it dashed. And then for me, a big part of that disappointment was, so half of it was that I disappointed everybody, that I wasn't able to bring home what they needed. The other part of that was, how can this type of person win again? How can this happen? I just felt like, when there is someone that is willing to do the work, actually do the work, and has the passion for taking care of the community, and, and wants to do it for the right reasons,
Right.
And then you have this other, and how does the other always win? How does that, not only in my race, but in so many other races, just all over the country, all over the world, how do people like this continue to keep winning? Why? And so that was the huge crusher. I was so disappointed. I just, I started to question, what could you have done different? Is there a day when you could have knocked more doors, and even though you were tired, you could have gone further? Is there, what could you have done to raise more money? What could you just second guessing every single thing that we did? And then just never getting to the point where it was like, okay, this is the why. It was just, okay, let's move on.
But you have run against a family dynasty that goes back decades in St. Louis. And I think that when you were, you unexpectedly lost, but did you get a lot of pushback like Amy did from local and state Democrats? I mean, did they just throw up roadblocks all the time?
There were some, but like I said, I already knew where the roadblocks probably would be. So I was prepared for that. One thing that was really difficult for me was being an activist, being a Ferguson activist, and just doing other work too, whether it was immigration or, just a lot of human rights work. um, you know, people didn't necessarily want to hear that. Like, so that was kind of surprising. And so that's where a lot of my closed doors were. It was like, oh, that's that activist. Oh, that, you know, so it was that kind of a mentality oftentimes. So I got pushed back from that. I got pushed back for being a single woman running for the seat, especially a single woman that's in ministry, you know. And so those were the things that, so that's where a lot of my pushback came in. Those closed doors were, you don't fit into the mold of what we deem is qualified for this position. And Amy can attest, I know Amy can attest to this. We received messages from all over the world when you know, about this movie.
Right.
And I don't mean a few, I mean hundreds, I mean thousands of messages from around the world of people saying how this message changed their life, touched them, or whatever. Women saying, I'm running for office because I saw this documentary. And sometimes, me personally, I have to look it up on the map. I'm like, I've never heard of this place. Where is this? You know, what country is this in? You know, so that part has been phenomenal.
Well, you know, Sally Ride, the female astronaut, once coined the phrase, you can't be what you don't see. And I think the documentary showcased all of you. And that, because we don't see a lot of candidates who are doing things differently, who are not fitting into the mold. And I always think, you know, just it's so inspirational for younger women, other people to see that you can do this. We don't have to do the same thing over and over again. And so I think both of you have helped break that mold of what is acceptable. Amy, I'm going to go back to you. I coined the phrase passion-driven leadership more than a decade ago to describe that it's usually a great loss or a challenge is a major motivator that propels women to seek elected office. Whether it is because of the Long Island Railroad shooting many years ago, all these different people, whether it's in Georgia's 6th district where the woman ran who's now elected to Congress whose son was gunned down. Might you tell us a little bit about your daughter and how that really, you woke up one day and you were going to turn your personal overwhelming grief into action?
That really was a journey for me. As I touched on a little bit earlier, you know, I had come from a background that my highest aspiration, you know, growing up was I was going to be lucky if I went to college. Mm-hmm. I was the first in my family to go to college, and I came from poverty and, you know, a single mom and all of those circumstances. So when I got to the point in my life, right before Shalyn came home again, right before her death, I thought I finally had reached that place. They always tell you, if you just work hard enough, you're safe, right? All those years I had fought so hard just to put a roof over my kid's house. I remember times we were homeless, times we didn't have electricity because I couldn't afford to pay the bill. You know, but I eventually did work through college and had come to, you know, I was at the top of my career as a CFO, as an executive, living that executive lifestyle, the 3,000 square foot home with a pool and jacuzzi, and, you know, married to an officer in the Air Force. And we just thought we had finally was there. I was so excited. You know, when Shalyn arrived, you know, I remember her constantly talking about her knee and her leg and how red it was. And never did I, in my wildest dreams, would I have thought that would lead to her demise. And I remember when she was in the hospital, and I was laying with her in bed, I remember I was just crying out to God at that point, just take me. As I was holding her, she was passing, I was screaming out, God, just take me. I've lived my life. Don't take my daughter, take me. And I broke at that moment. Sorry. That Amy died with Shalyn. And for about a year, I always try to tell people, you know, this wasn't an overnight thing because I don't want people to have unrealistic expectations with grief. For about a year, I didn't want to live and I was suicidal for about a year. And I would go in my bath. I remember just wailing and wailing. And I got to the point where I was so disheartened. I didn't know how this could happen. And I felt like no one cared. And I started looking, my husband's from Brazil. He immigrated from Brazil. And he told me about how they had something called universal health care. And I was like, what do you mean? It doesn't go through their job? Because remember, I was a CFO. I was the one that was trying to find plans. I didn't know anything about healthcare, but I was the one trying to figure out which was the best plan for the company. That's all I ever knew was it came from your job, or you were like at times when I was on Medicaid, you know, you were so poor, you couldn't afford anything. So you got Medicaid. I didn't understand that concept. So I started researching online, and I saw there was a conference about universal healthcare. I wanted to understand. Not only from an individual, but also from a businesswoman. I wanted to understand how this work. How does this even happen? Like, is this even possible? So I went to a conference for healthcare, and I met the amazing Senator Nina Turner. And my husband happened to meet her in the elevator of another woman, and he told her the story, and I didn't realize this. So I'm sitting there waiting, and I hear this woman. I'd never heard of Senator Nina Turner before. And she comes on and she's sitting there talking. She's like, and in this country, no 22-year-old should be dying from a lack of health care like Amy's daughter, Shalyn. And I was like, and the tears. I had never heard someone say, my daughter didn't deserve to die. Why didn't she have insurance? Why didn't she have this? She should have done this. It's always on the victim, right? And I went up to her afterwards, and I was really broken. And I remember just crying. I waited till everybody left, and I was sobbing. And she looked at me and she goes, you have all the bones you need. You just have to dig deep. And when you think you can't do it, dig deeper. Are you going to let them make you become another victim? And I was like, no. And I went back at that moment. I went back and I started organizing. And I still had I was not planning on running that. I never would have thought of that. And finally someone came up to me and was like, Amy, you have to primary him. And I was like, but I'm a single mom. I don't have the right background. They're going to tear me up. They're like, if you don't do it, who will? And other people's kids are dying. And I thought, I'm primarying you. You're not a public celebrity. You're a public servant. And that was really the journey of going from extreme grief into, I'm going to do something about this. I couldn't let it go. That's what kept my depression going. So I didn't know what to do with all of this. Oh, how is this happening? And when I heard it's happening to 60,000 people a year, I wasn't going to turn my back. I could not go and live in my comfort and in my little space and pretend like I hadn't seen what I had seen. And I wasn't going to let my daughter just be a number. But it was a journey.
Yes, it was. Well, you know, I once someone asked me, you know, tell me about passion. I said, look, passion, good or bad, without a plan is simply noise, that you have to have a plan. And I think what you have both done is, we could all be angry, but you have turned this anger into action that's measurable and continues to grow. I know that since we're celebrating the 100th year of suffrage, and that we have certainly is part of the reason we're having this conversation, when the language that was finally adopted and went into law in 1920 was the exact same language that was introduced at Seneca Falls in 1848. The language didn't change. And so it wasn't like women in 1856 said, oh golly, we haven't gotten anywhere, let's drop it. And so when you said it's a journey, I've always found public service is a journey. It is not a sprint. There's no magic wand. And so I love how you've used, it is a journey to get to where you are. And I appreciate your sharing that story with us today. Let's turn it a little bit. Tell us what it was like to have a filmmaker follow you during the campaign, Cori. Did it add a little bit more pressure?
Not at all. Not for me. It was, you know, most of the time I didn't even realize the camera was there. Being a part of the Ferguson movement, we had cameras around us in our faces all the time. you know, not just one camera, but so many cameras you could barely walk, you know, all the time. And whether it was a big camera, whether it was on a phone, you know, whatever, cameras were always around us, even when we didn't know they were there. You know, people were hiding the cameras. So it was just when we were asked, well, when I was asked to if I was okay with being filmed for this project, I said yeah. Didn't, you know, was like, okay. It was kind of like, you know, it's gonna, you know, let's just do what the other ones are doing. We had been, so many of us in the Ferguson Uprising had been approached by several people doing documentaries, you know, even after we stopped the daily protests, after a year and a half, after Michael Brown was murdered. So we still had, you know, so it was still kind of happening. So it was like, it wasn't, the camera wasn't there. And Rachel was so great. Like, she would make sure that she was kind of, you know, out of the way, but in the mix, you know. So,
and tell our audience a little bit about the filmmaker.
Yeah, so Rachel Lierz, she is this great filmmaker out of New York. She, her and her husband have this company called Jubilee Films, and they have an award-winning documentary called The Hand That Feeds. I believe they were either Emmy nominated for that, or they won the Emmy, one of the two. Anyway, and so they, her husband's name is Robin, and he was actually the editor for the film. He edited this entire film, and he kicked butt. I mean, it's amazing what he was able to do with all of this different footage. But saying this is one thing I want to say about them. When they approached to do this film, they didn't have the money to do it. I believe once we all said yes, then they started a Kickstarter to be able to do it. I remember there were days when Rachel would reach out to me and say, hey, I need to come and film you, you know, but I don't have the money to come to St. Louis. Tell me if you got something coming and I'll try to save up some money. Like, they were like really, really, really broke trying to put this together.
So tell me, Amy, what was your experience with all of a sudden having this filmmaker documenting everything?
The first thing that she asked, she called, I'd met her, you know, I'd met her at one of the conferences we were at, and when she called and said she wanted to film it, I was like, yeah, sure. I mean, no one's going to want to see it anyway because they all hate us, but if you want to film it, you know, I was still in that mindset that I was like, no, everyone hates me, and I'm not sure who's going to want to watch this.
Right.
It's like, you're probably not going to get anybody watching it, but yeah, come on. But it was a little bit, for me, it was a little bit intimidating. I had stepped out of my comfort zone going into politics. You know, I was an accountant, you know, so, you know, we kind of like sitting in our little office and being left alone, right? So I was thrust out into all, you know, trying to learn how to become a public speaker. You know, how to talk about politics in a way that was, you know, everyday people could understand. And now you're wanting to film this. And so I was very nervous in the beginning. And it's really, for me, it was showing all my vulnerabilities. I mean,
as you did, it was
it was like, I had to get past, when we talk about women also, we've always been told what? You never let them see you're scared. You never let them see you cry. I mean, there's all these things that you're never supposed to do as a woman, right? And especially as a businesswoman, which is where I'm coming from, right? My frame of reference. I fought so hard. I mean, I always wore black suits. You never saw me in a dress at the office because I wanted to come off with this persona like, don't mess with me. Like, I am in charge, I am in control. So to go from that and have fought so long to get that persona and that, you know, that whole I'm in charge to I'm not in charge, I'm here at your service and I am struggling to want to fight for you.
Right.
And it's affecting me. You know, that part where I'm crying, when I first saw that, I told her, you're not sticking that in the film. Have you lost your mind? You know, no way, Rachel. I mean, I was most upset about that, to be honest. And it goes back to, again, as a women, we are told that is a sign of weakness, right?
Absolutely.
And when that was happening, you know, the only thing that was going through my mind, I had just sat watching the results come in, holding Shillin's urn. It's not in the film, but right before I cried, I had just fallen to the ground. I was like, no, now more people are going to die. And I couldn't save them like I couldn't save Shilin. She was talking to me, she's like, Amy, we should have more representatives that care that freaking much.
Yeah.
And so this was like another process for me, was like opening up and showing that this is what reality is. I think you saw in all of us moments that were very private and intimate, and also very deep for each of us.
Right.
And she brought it out. So, you know, Rachel was an excellent person to work with. Most of the time I didn't even realize she was there, to be honest. And so she would sit back. I didn't even know she was filming me crying. So, you know, she was able to capture what authentically, what it's like to run.
Yes, and that was the term, because it really was so authentic to watch this. Great. I want to thank you both for joining us today. Is there anything you want to leave our audience with? Just some reflections on the documentary and your future as we wrap up. And we'll go over to Cori and then wrap up with Amy.
Yeah, to just remember that we walked into this thing not knowing the outcome, you know, but it was about the mission and not about how comfortable we were, you know. So, you know, when you need that boost, that political boost, or if you're trying to get something across to someone else, tell them to watch the film. And it's not even about partisanship. It's just about the, you know, stepping up, you know, having the courage, and, you know, just pushing that forward and really making change for the country. So tell other people to watch it. You know, it's not over with. You know, we got to watch this film and take it into classrooms, take it into businesses. You know, it's just there's a lot in there. So, and tell them to bring tissue.
Yes, I know. Thank you, Cori. Thank you, and I hope you're on the mend soon. Amy,
Thank you.
Last words for our audience.
I want everyone to know how powerful they are, that each and every one of us is more powerful than we ever could imagine, that as a group, we bring tremendous power, and never to let anyone tell you that you can't do it. You know, no matter what small measure it is that you become involved, get involved. Talk to people, start paying attention to what's happening, and have that seat at the table. You have a seat at the table. Right. All you have to do is to speak up and to be there, whether it's for school board, whether it's to be, you know, to lead an initiative to help feed the homeless, no matter what it is in your community that you see a need and that you're trying to lead that initiative, you can do it. You can have that voice. You have it within you. All you have to do is get out there and just start becoming active, start being involved, and you can make a tremendous difference and a tremendous change. Don't listen to the naysayers or even your internal naysayer. You know, we all have the power to make change.
I always like to say, if you don't have a seat at the table, you're on the menu. But we all need to adopt Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm, which used to say, if you don't have a seat at the table, pull up your own folding chair. And I think all of you have done that as we were watching the documentary to fulfill needs. And so I want to thank everyone who's joining us for this conversation. And with that, have a great day. And vote, vote, vote.
Thank you so much, Cori, Amy, and Nancy, for being here with us tonight. We're so appreciative here at the Bullock Museum for your participation in this incredibly important conversation. To all of you out there for attending, thank you so much for being with us tonight. And please continue the conversation at Bullock Museum. And if you want to find out more about any of our programming, you can go to thestoryoftexas.com. Have a safe and wonderful night, everybody. Thanks.